is Thursday, the 2nd of November 2017, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And Alice.
Hello.
So, QED happened.
QED did happen. It feels like a while ago now.
It does feel like a while ago. It was only a couple of weeks ago.
How many weeks
I'm
ago
still
was
getting over QED lurgy.
How is your QED? Because you got the QED lurgy bad.
I've been
you got nerd flu.
really poorly. Like for 2 weeks, I've been like hacking up my guts most night. We've been.
I shouldn't laugh at that, but.
She has.
I've been really poorly. It's gone onto my chest, and I've just been coughing constantly. It's been horrible.
We all went away to Wales for a week, and mine and Nicola's bedroom was next to yours and Warren's, so I can confirm that Alice had been hacking up her cough the entire the bloody night.
I was having to take codeine at night to make sure that I could sleep.
As a cough suppressant.
Blimey. Because I couldn't stop coughing, which meant I couldn't sleep. Warren couldn't sleep. Apparently, Nicola and Marge couldn't sleep. So, yeah.
But this is a lesson to epidemiologists everywhere. You get 600 people in one room, they're going to start... Somebody is going to be patients here.
Yeah.
I think it was Rick.
You think so?
Because Rick from Greater Manchester Skeptics, he was there. He had a cough.
Yeah.
He was mainlining Benylin for the whole weekend.
True. Yeah.
He literally said, I know this makes me a bad skeptic, but I'm going to go out and buy some cough medicine. Because I know it doesn't work,
soothing.
but fuck it, I'm going to go buy some cough medicine.
It is soothing. It was a real slow burner, though. For the first few days, I was like, oh, this is fine. I went and gave a talk in Leicester and everything. Like, I felt like, oh, I've been sick for a couple of days and it's not getting that bad. I'm probably going to be on the mend now and it's fine. And then it just got progressively worse and worse and worse for many, many days afterwards. I've been really sick.
Marsh, do you come down with a QED lurgy?
No, I've been fine. I mean, I was fucking knackered. I slept for most of the week after QED.
It was very exhausting.
Yeah, I slept
very exhausting.
A lot. Like me and Nicola went back to bed after we had our kind of like breakfast with the QED board on the Monday morning. You all left about midday. We went back to bed, woke up about 5:30, went to a gig. Went to public service broadcasting.
Yes.
Next day, Nicola got up very, very early to go to work.
Mm-hmm.
I stayed in bed till about like 9:30ish, something like that.
Right.
Got home, went to bed. And I think Wednesday, I did almost nothing on Wednesday. So I only really resurfaced back into the world on the Thursday, I think, something like that.
It was a very tiring QED.
It was knackering, yeah.
Very tiring QED.
And then on Friday, we fucked off to Wales for a week.
Especially with the fire alarm.
Oh, God, the fire alarm.
We had the fire alarm at QED. So for people who weren't at QED, which I imagine is the bulk of the listeners.
I mean, it's fair to say we were beset by issues that the majority of people would not have seen.
Yeah.
But we were very, very aware of.
As is ever the case with QED, it's the
Swan
thing.
Yeah, there were two random
work.
accidents, just complete random accidents that happen when you have people all together. Someone would fall over here or another thing there. That meant we had to call the paramedics out twice. But everyone's fine. Everyone's fine.
Two medical emergencies.
But we had two medical emergencies, and then 20 past 9, ahead of a 10 o'clock start on the Sunday.
Yeah.
Fire alarm.
Full
hotel evacuation.
Evacuate literally the entire hotel,
including all our AV staff.
So we had to leave all of the AV equipment unattended in the main room as we all evacuated out of the hotel.
In the middle of Manchester.
We're thinking, how are we going to start on time? Okay, right, well, if we start late, then we can borrow 5 minutes from this break and 5 minutes from that break, and we can try and get back on. Maybe we'll get back on schedule by the time lunchtime rolls around, etc., etc., etc. We're making all these plans. Eventually, we weren't outside for very long.
No.
Got back inside, started on time. On time.
Amazed.
Nothing ran over. Unbelievable. You get these conferences that run like they're 20 minutes over by the third session of the day. We were on time after a full fire evacuation.
Full evacuation, still
military
on time.
precision.
Oh, yeah.
And a nice full room because everybody was up.
We had,
not everyone. Most people are up.
We had
I'm aware of 2 people who are still in bed.
Well, we had some people who say, no, I just slept straight through that. Had no idea. So those people would have burned to death.
Spoke to Mike from our friend from Bristol, who lovely fella, who's the one who got us the tickets to Magnetic Fields. He said when the alarm was going off, he spent 5 minutes trying to make his phone stop making that noise before he realised it was the room that was making that noise.
Jabbing in his phone, going, "Shut up! Why is snooze not working?"
Yeah, and one of our speakers, James Ball, said he managed to sleep through it. He heard the noise, but he thought, "I'm sure it's nothing," and turned back over.
So that was QED. That was exciting.
Are we doing much of a wrap up of QED? I don't know how much we want to talk about QED because our listeners were either there or not there.
Yeah,
and it feels weird us talking about it, but it was good. It was fun. Lots of stuff happened.
If you weren't there, you missed a fucking treat, and you should come next year.
It was
an amazing.
It's QED. One of the best QEDs we've done, I think. The second time we've done a QED of that size in terms of complexity of God,
just scheduling the tweets for your schedule drove me insane because you had too many things going on. I had 45 tweets to tweet about every event.
And we had you running our social media this year, didn't we, Alice? So you did. I
did all your Instagram for you, which was fun.
Yeah,
I'm excited for next year because I didn't have much notice to get started this year. Next year, I'm going to do exciting things with it.
Well, because we were going to start you off on like kind of QED 2018. So we'll get Alice to do the social media, and then we thought, fuck it, we'll do it now.
We'll do it now. So like 2 weeks before the event.
It's fine.
Fuck it, why not? It'll be fine.
It worked well. I enjoyed doing the QED.
It worked out okay.
Yep, past guest on the show, Emma McCullough. She opened QED.
She did.
It was amazing.
Her talk was great.
Emma did very well. The right hand speaker didn't work for half of Emma's talk, that resulted in much flurry of activity behind the scenes. Turn the fucking speakers on.
It was interesting. We had Phil Scraton who closed it. Who I wasn't. I mean, I knew he was fantastic. I've seen him talk before. Incredibly powerful, incredibly moving stuff about the Hillsborough disaster, the football disaster from of Liverpool fans who died in the FA Cup clash with Forest. Yeah. But what was interesting to me was living Liverpool for the last 15 years or whatever it is. You're steeped in that story, and being a football fan, you're kind of steeped in that story. And I thought, I wonder whether this will translate to people who aren't that interested in football, who aren't from Liverpool, who aren't from the UK, but talking to people from around the world who were there. They were all like, Jesus, I would not have come to see that talk because I didn't know what it was about. But now I see it. Jesus, this was incredible. And, standing ovation, most of the audience openly weeping, just absolutely
it was an incredible talk.
Yeah. And
as you said, we've seen it before, but just in that room and with that audience, it was particularly moving and
literally people in tears.
Yeah. Including,
I was crying most of the way through, and I've seen it before. I knew what he was going to say. He was in tears at the end.
Yeah, including Phil. Yeah, he's on stage openly weeping, which was astonishing.
What I thought was really interesting was a conversation that was happening at the bar where someone was saying that they were critical of Phil Scraton because one of the things he didn't do was put across the fact that Liverpool fans were thugs, and this was their criticism of the talk.
Okay.
And
did they watch the talk?
Well, yeah, he said I watched the entire talk. And I don't know whether it was entirely fair because he said, I worked in football stadiums in the 80s and Liverpool fans, I experienced them being very rowdy. And I thought it's incredible when you see Phil Scraton, who spent literally the entire time since that disaster pouring through, as he talked about, 4,000 pages of original source material, to see that talk and still say, at a Skeptics conference, to still think to yourself, well, this doesn't gel, this doesn't make sense, this guy who's poured through 4,000 pages of original material, original source material, because my own personal experience is different to it.
Yeah, my anecdote says that his data is incorrect.
And it just struck me as like the chap who said it, I'm sure is a great skeptic in every other area, but clearly wasn't being very skeptical of his own personal experience there. And it struck me that it's so hardwired into us, the idea that our experience of the world should colour should help dictate what we think the world is or what happens, the events around us. My own experience of them have to be my lens through which I see them. And we had another perfect illustration of it later on the weekend after QED had finished, when someone came up to us and said, my one criticism of this whole event was there were too many all-male panels. And I remember saying to the person, well, were there? And they said, oh, well, there was definitely a couple. I said, were there definitely a couple? Well, there was at least one. Were there really? Because I knew full well that there were zero all-male panels. But again, someone had come in with that criticism in mind. They thought, right, there is always too many all-male panels. That is the criticism. And the fact that person had hanging around their neck for the previous 48 hours a booklet with the entire schedule in which there was the proof. So even if you hadn't seen all of those panels, you could have just referred to the schedule to say, oh, actually, there were zero all-male panels.
Yeah.
It struck me as fascinating that people have their own personal experience or their own personal agenda, their own personal interpretation or bias on the world, colours entirely the way that they will view something, to a point where they are either entirely writing off the evidence in the case of Phil Scraton, or not even bothering to look at the evidence because what they know what's true. That was utterly fascinating, even at a skeptical conference.
For more information on that, look out for Carol Tavris's talk when we finally get around to publishing it, which was very much the theme of that talk. I want to thank everyone who came to QED. Thanks to all the speakers. Thanks to you, Marsh, for all the work you did on it. Thanks to Jeff and Rick.
Well done, you as well.
Don't know if they listen.
No, don't know.
Thanks to Andy. Nicola definitely doesn't listen.
So don't thank Nicola on here. Other people can thank Nicola. We won't bother thanking her on here.
That's harsh.
She's not listening.
But
that's like saying you could get a bucket and bury it and shout, bury it in mud and shout into that bucket praise for Nicola. Wasting your time, mate. She's not going to hear it.
The point would be the praise for Nicola is due.
Yes.
You're basically saying I can rob this bank because nobody will find out.
No, I'm saying this bank is abandoned. No one has been in this bank for 60 years.
So you can help yourself to the vault.
The vault is open and all the money is just there and it hasn't been used or doing anything for 60 years. You might as well just wander in and take some. It's fine. This £5 note is on the floor. The owner doesn't know it's gone. The owner isn't around to give it back to. I might as well keep it.
Did I tell you when I was about 13, 14, I'm walking to school and I'm with my friend Duncan. And Duncan finds £20 note on the floor. And this is the mid-90s, so £20 is like £1 billion.
Yeah.
Especially since Brexit. So he finds like a £20 note on the floor and he goes, I'm going to be a good Samaritan. I'm going to give this back to the owner. And it's like, how do you know who the owner... So he walks into the nearby post office and just holds it up in the air and goes, is anyone less £20? And this bloke goes, yeah, I've lost 20. Oh, thanks, mate. Thanks. Oh, thanks very much. Here's a quid for your trouble. Thanks very much for that, mate. Oh, I'm so glad you found that. That would have been...
Mate's a mug.
And he came out all chipper, thinking,
your mate's an absolute mug.
So
I once found 20 quid on the floor. I was walking with mates and this was only maybe sort of 8 years ago, something like that. And it was folded into a tiny, tiny, tiny little square and everyone just stepped over it, not knowing what it was. And I went, hang on, that's not recognisable. Picked it up and opened it up and it was a £20 note. I was delighted. So we went to, we later went to a cafe and a friend of mine decided he'd order a burger because I'd found 20 quid.
So he ordered a burger because you'd found 20 quid?
And he was like, well, it's not your money, Marsh, so you might as well pay for it.
So it's just anyone's to spend.
But he literally didn't have any money on him. He's like, well, I can't pay for it. I haven't got any money on me. I was like, you absolute prick. So I had to spend this money on him.
But the last people, on the subject of food, the last people I want to think is all the people who brought snacks for our live show.
Loads of people did that.
And Veka, who sent a load of snacks over in the post.
He did,
which was brilliant. So thanks very much to everyone who came along to the live show and took part in the live show. That was brilliant. That was terrific fun. Apologies to people who I hit in the face with the Caramac.
See, you threw those Caramacs very violently, like way more violently than I was expecting when I suggest you start throwing Caramacs into the crowd.
It was fine.
I was expecting more of a frisbee tactic of the Caramac moving horizontally flat through the air.
That would have just hit people in the front row square in the face.
Throwing knife style. Just like swinging them at people's heads.
It needed the spin to be able to fly straight.
No, but
you should have done it underarm so that it had a bit more of a
parabola,
an angle for it to start.
I don't know what is the safest way.
Plus, we had also obtained consent from the audience ahead of time to say...
We had
somewhere between consent and coercion. Yeah, but I don't know what the safest way to throw a Caramac is. I would argue my way is the safest. So you're thinking parabola.
Underarm, so that it goes up higher and loses energy on the way down.
It doesn't lose energy on the way down. Gravity accelerates it. This is why, the higher you go, the further you drop.
Yeah, but will a Caramac dropped off the Empire State Building kill you? Is the question. I don't know that there is enough acceleration.
Yes, but only if you're diabetic. I think the best way is to throw it side on. So flat, so you've got the flat of the chocolate bar.
That's just going to be more painful when it hits you, though.
No, it's not. It's like a frisbee. You could do it with a kind of a hoopla style, like playing kites. That's like playing the medieval game kites. A hoopla kind of style. I think that's the way.
And if you get enough welly in it, it would technically go into orbit.
Remove the welly. No welly. Just a gentle kind of like.
I was trying to orbit some Caramacs. So apologies.
Offhand toss.
Apologies to anyone I hit in the face with a Caramac. But on the other hand, you've got a Caramac. So
that is very much the apology.
Swings and roundabouts, isn't it?
Not everyone did.
Lessons learned, we didn't have enough Caramacs.
No, I only bought a box of 48. There was more people in the room than I expected.
There were lots of people in the room.
There were more.
We had a queue. We had a queue of people.
Unbelievable.
Some people didn't get in.
Did they not get in?
I don't know.
I think they all got in.
Everybody got
Don't
in.
you start a rumour? Yeah, we're having to turn people away, like some sort of 19th century marketing tactic.
So I came home from QED to find my cat was sick.
Oh, blimey!
Really poorly.
Which was has actually hit me really hard because I've literally had my two cats that I've got with Nell and Marwood. I've literally had them my entire adult life. I got them both when I was 20. I've had them my entire life, and so they're both elderly cats now. They're both 17. So I'm struggling actually quite a lot with Nell being sick. So she's got some sort of like liver thing going on. I came home and she was vastly underweight, and she'd been losing weight for a couple of weeks. And I was like, I keep an eye on that. Maybe I'll take her to the vet after QED. But when I came back after being away for QED, she was really feeble. She obviously hadn't eaten in the time that I'd been away at all. So I took her straight down to the emergency vet. They gave her an antiemetic to see if that was if it was nausea was stopping her from eating, because she showed no interest in food whatsoever. Took her to the regular vet the next day. They kept her in. They took bloods, which and the vet was really nice and showed me like the readout of the bloods report and say this is what this means and this is what they mean, and took me through everything from a kind of science-based perspective, which I thought was really nice. You say here's a glucose, and her glucose levels are outside of normal, but I think that's the stress of being here and having the things, so we're not worried too much about that. Her liver function is way off the charts. We're kind of worried about that. Her electrolytes are off, but we think that's just dehydration, so we're going to put on a drip and then test those again, and we'll see if that, and so on and so forth. And after all the said and done, her liver function was off. So she's been treated for that. But what I found quite frustrating was that the vet said, here's some pills, and he gave me an antibiotic for her. Gave me a pill that, when I've Googled what the drug is, it's a pill that's meant to disrupt the formation of gallstones or dissolve gallstones.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think he thinks she's got gallstones, but it's just that's a risk of when she's having liver problems.
Yeah.
And he said, I want you to go out and buy this. And he wrote the thing down on a slip of paper. He says, I don't have any here. The stuff that I've got here is for dogs. And dogs and cats can have the same drug in this case, but it's for big dogs, and the dose is too much for her. So go out and buy this and give her one a day. It's a liver supplement, and it'll help her liver regenerate faster. So we went home and we bought a box of this stuff, and it turned up and it's got written on it, a complimentary treatment. And I went,
if it's legitimately complimentary.
Ingredients, ash.
Is your vet giving you woo?
So I Googled it. Woo.
Oh, no.
It is woo. There is, well, it may or may not be woo. Basically, there is no clinical evidence.
Yeah.
So there was an article on Science-Based Medicine where it was like, these are supplements that are routinely handed out in veterinary practice that have got no clinical evidence. And this was like number 4 or something, saying, it's used in humans for this and this, and it's given out by vets for this and this and this. But actually, the only clinical study that there's ever been was like in dogs for this other condition, and there's no clinical evidence. So it's a lack of evidence. It might work a fucking treat, but there is no evidence that is the case. So as best I can see, my vet's just told me to give my cat woo.
So what are you doing?
Which has kind of got me going.
Could you give your cat woo, but explain to the cat that it's woo?
Well, like placebo without deception.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's annoyed me a little bit. So I tweeted at Danny Chambers and kind of said, and he asked how she was doing, which was nice. So she's okay. She's a little bit better. She's still being very fussy over her food. She's bright enough in herself, but is very fussy over her food and is basically nothing but tuna fish for a week. But she's slowly putting weight back on and so on and so forth. But that coming after QED, which was an exhausting couple of weeks leading up to QED, then QED, and then getting home and straight away my cat's sick. So I'm at the vet at 1:00 in the morning trying to get my cat sorted out on the Monday after QED. Oh, it was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous.
Oh, blimey.
But I'll keep listeners informed of what's happened to my cat. Unless she dies, then I probably won't mention it again.
Ever again.
I won't be able
Unless
to
you mention it on the show in order to get a new cat, because that's normally what happens when you need some...
Just put one in the post too.
Speaking of new cats, I'm getting a cat.
You are getting a
cat in like a week and a bit.
Yeah.
So listeners, I'll be able to tell you about the cat when I have a cat.
Is it a cat or is it a kitten?
It's a pretty young cat. I think she's about a year, 18 months, something
cat teenager.
Like that. Yeah. Pretty young.
A teenager. I don't know what a cat teenager
I don't know.
would be.
She's all black. Rescue. Yeah.
What's she called?
We don't know yet.
You haven't named your cat?
Well, she's currently called Serenity.
Okay.
Now, we don't want to call her Serenity.
It's a bit hippie, isn't it?
It's a bit hippie. Well, specifically, it's because the lady who found her, or who adopted her at the pet home type of thing, what's the word? Rescued her.
Right.
Rescued her in September, so wanted to give her an S name. And she said, so I called her Serenity because I saw it on a bottle of perfume and I thought it was nice. And she's like, it's lovely, isn't it, that Serenity? It's a lovely name.
Okay.
She fosters a lot
She so coming
up with names is...
She's also, she seemed very, very nice. But like when we went to go and see Serenity, she's currently, but not going to be called in the future, all the cats that were in cages had little pictures of like a Jesus here and a saint on. All the cages had their own little saints on it. So we're adopting a Catholic cat, I think, which isn't ideal. But there were two cats who were up for adoption. We only saw one of them. We didn't see the other one. We would have if we
because you were worried that you would take both of them.
Well, yeah, Nicola was worried about if not taking both, then worrying about being able to choose between.
Yeah.
But it would have been. I'm not sure it would have been easy or not because the other cat was called Princess Diana. Princess Diana.
Right,
yeah,
okay.
Called the cat Princess Diana.
Not even Lady Diana.
Not even Lady Diana.
This cat was named at some point in the 90s.
It was, yeah, exactly. So yeah, we're getting a cat in a little bit before I go to South Africa, which is bloody soon.
Why are you going to South Africa?
I've not mentioned this before, have I?
Not on the show, no.
I'm speaking at a conference on quackery in South Africa, in Stellenbosch, which is a little bit north of Cape Town.
Okay.
Which is going to be really interesting because I've not been anywhere in Africa. I've not been to South Africa.
You've not been to like Tunisia or anything like that? A lot of people go to the kind of North African.
Oh, I see. I thought
that
was just a really specific call.
Popular holiday destination.
It's a popular holiday
what have you heard, Mike?
Yeah.
What have you heard? My ISIS cover is blown. I'm going to.
We'll come back to ISIS.
Will we? Oh, there we go. Throw forward. I'm going to a thing at Stellenbosch University. I'm speaking there on the 22nd, 23rd. It's the Monday.
Okay.
Around there, a conference on quackery.
Is it a public thing? Are there tickets available? Could South African listeners go along?
I understand that if you're in South Africa, if you're in Cape Town or the surrounding areas, then yeah, you absolutely can go along, is what I understand. It's a Monday and Tuesday conference, maybe, or a Sunday and Monday conference. I don't have the full details because I had QED, to be honest. So I was like, I know I'm doing that, but it's coming. I'm leaving on the 16th. Which is all very
Which is the same day as our event.
It's the same as our event, yeah. It means I won't get to see Dave Annick doing his thing, which is a bit of a baller, because he was brilliant at QED.
He was.
He's amazing.
He was absolutely a lovely legend fella.
He was brilliant.
Oh, I have something woo from Wales. So Nicola takes vitamin supplements, ones that are recommended by a doctor. So, you've got this deficiency or this type of thing. You taking this will help you with certain things.
So it's legit, not
legit kind of stuff.
Supplementation.
She normally buys them from Boots, which I know you would hate because you hate Boots.
Yeah,
but she had forgotten to buy them, forgotten to bring them with her. And when she went to the local Boots there, they didn't stock them. So we went round the corner into Holland and Barrett's for them because I thought, well, they're vitamin supplements. And she was like, well, but she needs them. So and they're normally £3 in Boots. The same portion would have been £8 in Holland and Barrett's. So it's like, fuck that, I'll get them ordered into Boots. And she very loudly says, £8? They're only £3 in Boots. But before that, when she was looking to try and find them, she said, I don't even know where they'd be in here. And I said quite loudly, yeah, I don't know if they've got a special section for stuff that actually works, like when there's a small shelf over in the corner for stuff that works. But while she was looking for that, one of the things I found was a product called Detexology, which were detox pads for reflexology, and it was your detoxing foot pad. That were stimulating acupressure points in order to draw toxins out of the sweat glands to detoxify the body. So it's literally the ones that you sit them in a puddle of water and they go brown anywhere by themselves. Yeah, fuck all to do with your body. Yeah, it was a fortnight's supply. How much do you reckon that was going for? A fortnight's supply.
Fortnight's supply detoxifying foot pads. £18.99.
£26.
Jesus Christ.
£26 for 2 weeks. Unbelievable. 2 weeks of like little shitty tea bags that do nothing.
So they're expecting you to spend £50 a month.
50 quid a month.
Yeah, 50 and a bit pounds a month.
Yeah, £600 a year.
On bollocks.
On bollocks. £600 a year on what were basically herbal tea bags that turn brown when exposed to any moisture, regardless of the source of the moisture.
As indeed the tea bags.
That's true. Yeah. That is true. Yeah, maybe they're just tea bags.
Tea bags you stuff in your shoes.
Yeah. So there you go. Detoxology, I think it was called, or detox. It was somewhere between reflexology and detox. So it was like detexology. It was really bad. It was bad.
Much like Marsh discussed on a previous episode, I also have a list of Google alerts. My Google alerts are a mixture of things that bring up potential Skeptics with a K topics or potential blog post stories, in addition to some that I'm just generally interested in. So my main personal interest one is the cell biology alert, but every now and then it throws up something of interest for either the podcast, my blog, or for both. The headline of the IFLS story my Google alert showed me is 30,000 scientific papers may be unreliable thanks to cell line contamination.
Oh, I saw this headline.
Okay.
I saw this headline, yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of got around a little bit. I did a quick search of the terms 30,000 papers on Google News, and it brought back another... This isn't sponsored by Google. I mentioned Google quite a lot so far. Anyway, so I Googled 30,000 papers, and it brought back another 2 news articles, one from Science Alert, headlined, "Over 30,000 published studies could be wrong due to contaminated cells," subtitled, "This is very, very bad."
Nice.
Really weird.
Good editorialising.
And one from the Daily Mail titled, "More than 30,000 scientific studies could be wrong due to widespread cell contamination dating back 60 years, new report warns."
And here's the title of all 30,000 studies in the headline of the Daily Mail article.
A new study from Radboud University in the Netherlands has found that thousands of studies rely on research that involved contaminated cells. This means that the cures or treatments the scientific papers led to could be ineffective. The researchers are calling for amendments to be added to all scientific papers that relied on research linked to contaminated cells. That was like the bullet points underneath the headline. The Science Alert article begins, "Researchers warn that large parts of biomedical science could be invalid due to a cascading history of flawed data in a systemic failure going back decades. A new investigation reveals more than 30,000 published scientific studies could be compromised by their use of misidentified cell lines, owing to so-called immortal cells contaminating other research cultures in the lab." So I've introduced cell lines on the podcast before, but it was like my first episode. Like
yeah,
really.
It was HeLa cells was your first story that you ever did.
It was a long time ago.
I probably wasn't even listening then.
Probably worth another primer on what the cell lines
I think that's back when we were sexist and just talked over you and didn't listen to you. So, I have no idea whether you actually said it or not.
So I'll briefly reiterate what we mean when we talk about cell lines. In the lab, we grow different types of cells from different types of sources. Occasionally, these are what we would refer to as normal cells that behave in a normal or near normal way. But more often than not, we use immortalized cancer cells. Cancer cells of various types grow really well in a lab setting, and we've figured out how to keep them growing effectively forever since we first successfully cultured cells in the lab in 1951. The first cells we grew in labs were cervical cancer cells called HeLa cells, but now we have different cell lines of many different types covering many of the different cancer types that we know about, which means we can model different types of cancer in the lab in order to assess different disease progression mechanisms and different treatment types under test conditions.
Were those other cell lines also like stolen from people without the consent of their families?
No.
Were they from people?
Yes.
Like, was it like, we found a Henrietta Lacks for liver cancer?
Yeah, so every cell line I've ever known of, and I don't know if this is true for every single cell line, a lot of cell lines are derived from other cell lines, but our initial cell lines are all derived from humans.
Okay.
So you can go into, there's databases you can go into to look at the information about different cell lines, and you can find out, often you can find the gender and age of the patient and what kind of cancer they had.
But were they patients who ended up with immortal cells in the same way as the HeLa cells were? Or was that just a unique mutation of Henrietta Lacks's cancer that other people haven't subsequently had?
No, it's a case of the cell lines we got from Henrietta Lacks were unique-ish. Up until that point, they were unique in the sense that they were incredibly aggressive and grew really, really well. Since then, we've figured out better techniques for allowing less mutated, less aggressive cancers to grow in culture, but it's the same principle.
Okay.
It's just HeLa cells did it better than other cancer cells.
Gotcha.
It also means that HeLa cells are less useful.
It's the worst advertising slogan in the world. HeLa cells do it better than other kinds of cancer.
In fairness, though, that's all. It's about advertising, but again, you don't really need to sell a lot of cancer cells.
That's true.
There's not a yeah, that's true.
There are companies that sell cancer cells to labs, including selling HeLa cells.
We know cancer.
But it's important we make sure all our cells are labelled correctly to ensure that when we plan to work on lung cancer cells, we really are using cells derived from lung cancer and not accidentally testing our lung cancer theories on liver cells. But that's not to say that there isn't a benefit from testing in different types of cancer cell. In fact, we know in general that most cell lines are not perfect models for the disease because they're so generally fucked up. HeLa cells are the best example of this because they're a complete mess. They've got multiple copies of their genetic material. They've got loads of mutation. They're just generally totally fucked. They're not a good example of cervical cancer. They're not a good, they're not a good example of human disease because they're so fucked.
Yeah.
But we use them in every lab. They've been used for decades. A lot of our understanding has been initially proven in HeLa cells. They're a good starting point for all of those reasons and many others.
Because they're durable and useful.
And they're durable
tools,
and they survive and they grow like stink and they're everywhere. You can compare your data to other people's data because HeLa cells are in every lab in the world.
So they grow like stink?
Yeah.
Is that a phrase?
Yeah.
They grow like stink? Have you heard that before?
It's not a phrase that I'd heard before, although I kind of followed the meaning.
I wasn't even sure if I could follow
I don't know where I've got that phrase from, but it's
okay, no,
common
they grow
that I've had.
like stink. Okay, no, fine.
Did you meet Stink? He was a tall fella.
He was.
Very tall guy. Very, very tall guy.
So there's pros and cons to having...
Smelled great.
Yeah, ironically enough.
Oddly enough.
That's why he was named that.
It was an irony thing.
Like you get Shorty, it's a really tall fella. Yeah.
I don't know if it is a phrase now. I wonder if it's just a my family thing.
Or whether you just
because some people... No, I haven't made it up. I've heard it.
Misheard it.
No.
It grows like sting.
Well, maybe I have, but I
grows
don't know.
like sting.
It grows like sting.
It's definitely something my dad says, but maybe it's just my family. Some people have those little weird phrases that are in the family.
I've never heard that.
Mike's now Googling.
I'm now Googling.
Did you mean
sting.
grows like sting?
Yeah, no, it is in there. The free dictionary of idioms has got.
See?
I was going to say the free dictionary of idiots.
It's a phrase.
What's it say, Mike?
Oddly enough, the phrase is not grow like stink. It is like stink, and you can have any.
You can have anything. You can add it to anything.
Anything.
You can shrink like stink.
So it says these kids move through the test like stink.
That means nothing. Then,
as an example,
this is meaningless.
There we go.
But the like there is using it in a not a metaphorical but a similitical sense, and you're similizing with something that's completely universal and could mean anything. It's like Smurf.
No, it means rapid. It means quickly. So it grows like stink would be it grows quickly.
Oh, okay.
Because it is as fast as a smell spreads.
Good. I'm glad we've ploughed that particular furrow.
I'm looking forward to the Olympics now. Next 100-meter chap. Oh, he ran like stink.
So many cancer cell lines have multiple genomic duplications, so they have an abnormal number of chromosomes. Some have whole regions of DNA majorly restructured, gaining or losing entire proteins from the genetic code. Some are dramatically mutated in ways that affect their overall survival. So as scientists, we use cancer cell line models to test first principles, but when it comes to real reliable data, we need to look in multiple different cell lines so we can prove that it's a general rule that we can apply to lots of different models, but also we need to extend our findings into living animal models and try and find ways that we can assess this better. Cell lines are not... We don't trust cell lines to tell us everything we need to know because they're terrible in lots of ways.
Yeah.
So bearing all that in mind, let's talk about the paper. The paper covered in these reports comes out of the Institute for Science in Society, which they shorten to ISIS.
Nice!
Okay.
Nice! What's the impact factor on ISIS?
They're an institute, not a journal.
They do have a blast radius, though. How long have they been going?
I don't know.
I wonder were they tempted to change their name?
They've got a little lowercase I in the middle there.
Yeah. Well, what's the Institute for? What was it?
Science in Society.
It can be like science and literature. Oh man, we're ISIL now. This is no better. Let's try and get something round to Daesh.
So they're based in the Netherlands.
The Department for Advanced Educational Scientific.
Their own news coverage on the paper said, unfortunately, HeLa cells have been contaminating other cell cultures for decades. They didn't mention that the reason for this is because they grow like stink.
Yep.
Due to, for instance, carelessness in the lab, these rapidly reproducing cells began taking over other cell cultures. This wasn't limited to HeLa alone, but was also observed in other immortal cell lines.
Hang on, is this ISIS complaining about a lack of purity of cell life?
Yes. Researchers found more than 451 cell lines that were completely taken over by other cells. Large amounts of cell cultures have therefore been mislabeled. The paper itself is published in PLOS One and called The Ghosts of HeLa, How Cell Line Misidentification Contaminates the Scientific Literature.
The website for that institute is really bad because they've destroyed all the icons.
That's a terrible joke.
Couldn't get
there. It's a terrible joke.
Couldn't get there.
The Ghosts of HeLa, How Cell Line Misidentification Contaminates the Scientific Literature.
Right.
In the introduction, the authors explain, the problems with cell line misidentification have been known for decades, commencing with the controversies surrounding HeLa cells in the 1960s. In spite of several alarm calls and initiatives to remedy the problem, the misidentification continues to haunt biomedical research, with new announcements of large-scale cross-contaminations and widespread use of misidentified cell lines appearing even recently. As a cell biologist, this particular paragraph set my already sceptical alarm bells ringing a little. The intro to this paper massively, not just from this paragraph, but from the entire intro, it really does read like opinion rather than science.
Right.
It's very much, we think this is a massive problem and here's how we're going to go ahead identifying that. But there are issues with misidentified cell lines, but it does read a lot like scaremongering. But I gave them the benefit of the doubt and read on. They say, before any action can be taken, it is essential that we get a sense of the size and nature of the problem of contaminated literature. This raises several questions. First, how many research articles have been based on misidentified or contaminated cell lines, and how wide is their influence on the scientific literature? So these are the questions that the paper sets out to answer, and they are important questions before we can set the alarm bells ringing about contamination of cell lines. The paper outlines its methods clearly. They took Table 1 of version 8, the most up-to-date version of the database of cross-contaminated or misidentified cell lines from the International Cell Line Authentication Committee, ICLAC, which lists 451 cell lines which are known to be contaminated with other cell lines.
Okay.
So there's a big database of cell lines where we know what the cell line is supposed to be. We know what type of cancer that cell line is supposed to be. We know what it's contaminated with. Either we know what species it is or what cell type it is. So some of them are contaminated with non-human species. You get a human cell line that's actually turns out to be mostly rat cells or mostly mouse cells. But mostly they're contaminated with other human cell lines, but they're not the cancer type that they should have been, that you were expecting them to be.
Okay.
And in many cases, we know what cell type they are. A lot of them are HeLas, because HeLas are everywhere, but some of them are contaminated with lots of different types of cell. Sometimes one cell line is contaminated with a cell line that is very similar to what it should be. So you'll get lung carcinoma contaminated with a different lung carcinoma cell type.
Right. Okay.
So in some cases, the data you're finding might still be applicable to that particular disease, but by not knowing which parent type of cell it is, you don't necessarily know which mutations they carry, because even within the same type of cancer, they have lots and lots of different types of mutation, and that might be particularly important to the thing that you're working on. But it might not be. So it's a case of you need to know the information, but it doesn't necessarily matter if they're contaminated. It depends on the specific study.
Right.
So they use this database of 451 cells that we know are contaminated with other cell lines. They represent a wide range of different cell types, some of which are contaminated with cells that are very similar, some that are very different, and some that are not even human. They highlighted a problem in that they were only able to identify papers which reference the cell types in the title, abstract, or keywords, which are the easily searchable parts of publications using large-scale databases such as PubMed.
Yes.
They didn't use PubMed, they used Web of Science, which is another large database for a wide range of academic publications. They picked this database because it's particularly useful for modifying search terms and filtering findings. It's a good database to use. They could have made the study more rigorous by using 2 or 3 different databases to get the best coverage of the literature, but Web of Science is a good database. For each of the 451 cell lines, they hunted down the establishing articles, meaning the paper that first reported the use of each cell line in culture.
Okay.
These they got from a number of other databases, Cellosaurus, DSMZ.
Cellosaurus.
Okay. Scientists are very imaginative with their names. DSMZ, ATCC, and ECAC. And they found articles for 255 cell lines. They collected all of the papers that cited those establishing papers, assuming that they all use the cell lines referenced in the establishing paper. They checked that that was definitely the case for only 3 case studies.
Right.
Out of how many?
255.
Yeesh.
So I'm not convinced it's a reasonable assumption to say just because a paper referenced the establishing article means that they use that cell line.
Mm-hmm.
They argue their case for that, and their arguments are fine. I'm not convinced. But it's definitely not sufficient validation to just look at 3 case studies. Next, they used each cell line from the 451 on the list. So that's how they got. That's one of the methods they used. They took 255 establishing articles and took all of the papers that cited those articles. And then the second method they used was to search each cell line from the 451 on the list in Web of Science in 25 different research fields, counting each article only once if it was reproduced in multiple fields.
Okay.
And then that gave them another list of papers that were, in theory, using these cell lines, but obviously they just mentioned the cell lines in the abstract title or keywords. We can't be sure that they actually used them.
Because the title of the thing could be "Why We Will Never Use This Kind of Cell Ever Again Because It's Stupid."
Yeah. They just mention it. They don't necessarily use it. They just mention it.
Yeah.
They don't even mention it in the methods. The search isn't going on through the methods.
Doesn't even go into the methods. Yeah, sure.
Next, they used a function on Web of Science called Citation Report, which allowed them to identify which papers had cited the initial ones that they found. This is termed the secondary literature and gives an indication of how far the potentially misleading data might have spread. They excluded self-citations to get a decent picture of the reach of that initial primary literature. They went on then to validate the papers that they'd found. Because they were only looking at papers that mentioned the cell type by name, they needed to validate that this was representative of papers actually using the cell lines. To do this, they organised the papers by publication date and checked every 200th paper for whether they actually use the cell lines.
It's not a brilliant way to sample it, I would have thought.
Now, there's a major flaw within this validation technique based on the numbers, and the data in general there's a major flaw with, again, based on the numbers, but I'll come back to it in a minute. Just firstly, to broadly describe their findings, basically they found 2 things. That 33,755 primary articles mentioned one of the 551 cell lines in their abstract title or keywords, and at least a few of them definitely did use the cell lines as shown by their validation technique.
Yeah.
Based on their findings from the analysis on the secondary literature, they estimated that 500,000 papers cited the mislabeled data. They did go on to look at the spread of the papers published based on country and year to highlight that the problem is growing rather than diminishing, and it's a worldwide problem.
Well, of course, it'd be growing rather than diminishing because
publication numbers are going up.
New publications come out, yeah.
But their concrete finding can be boiled down to those 2 numbers, that 33,755 articles mention mislabeled cell lines in their abstract title or keyword, and 500,000 cite those papers. Approximately. That 500,000 is an estimation. But there are some real problems here that were highlighted when I downloaded the raw data from the supplementary file. The first thing I did with the raw data was calculate the total number of papers available on each cell line and then organise them by size. From here, I spotted the problem with their validation technique. Only 44 cell lines of 451 are reported on 200 plus times, which makes their check every 200th paper validation technique hugely flawed. Less than 10% of these cell lines have 200 citations.
Yeah. So they're only checking one per. They could only be checking one per cell line, as it were.
For the ones that have.
Yeah. So if you got 50 papers using a particular cell line, they wouldn't have ever got to the 200th one.
Exactly.
So they would have checked paper 1 and never again.
Exactly. The vast majority, 90%, more than 90% of these cell lines had less than 200 citations for them.
And they did that sorting by publication date as well, where the earliest paper is the one which is less likely to have used a contaminated cell, because they haven't been contaminated since day one.
Perhaps, yeah. We don't know necessarily when they became contaminated exactly.
Okay.
I suppose it's arguable that they were contaminated
from
in the
day
first
one.
handling of it.
That's possible, yes. But it's also possible that many of the ones contaminated by HeLa cells have been contaminated later.
Yes.
What's more, this really highlights how infrequently these particular 451 cell lines are used in the literature. The highest two-cited cell lines are cited less than 4,000 times each. Beyond that, there are only 3 cited more than 1,000 times. Whereas if we search PubMed for some commonly used cell lines, we get much larger numbers. HeLa, the most commonly used cancer cell lines, returns over 95,000 search hits. But even MCF7 cells are cited over 30,000 times, and Hex are cited nearly 10,000 times.
You said there was some that was cited like fewer than 50 times.
Yeah,
like 90. You said like 90%.
90% are less than 200.
Yeah.
Only 10% have 200 plus.
So these contaminated cell lines are not being widely used in research
anyway. They're not
anyway.
very frequently used.
Yeah.
The average is about 75. If you take that 33,755 across all 451, the average is 75. But the top 2 are nearly 4,000. So it's skewed.
Yeah. What the median is. That's why you need a median, not an average.
I started to run out of time to write this, but I'm going to write this up for my blog and do some more in-depth stuff on their raw data.
Do it properly instead of on this show.
Yeah.
And even the lesser used Shushy cells are cited nearly 7,000 times.
Shushy cells.
Shushy, SHSY5Y.
Right.
They're neuronal cell lines. We call them Shushy cells. I don't think many other people do. I think it's an R lab thing, possibly.
And how are you pronouncing 5?
As an S.
It's an S.
Hang on, we all know that 5 is pronounced as an F. We all know that from the boy band 5. Just like 7s are pronounced as V, and we know that from the film 7.
From the film 7. Yeah.
Technically, that film was called Sir Sevenin.
So yeah, these cell lines seem to be really infrequently used. While I do think this paper is of some use, it reads a lot like someone backing up an opinion with a database search that has then been published. I would like this paper to use more rigorous methods, but more importantly, I just don't think these particular cell lines are used commonly enough for it to be too much of a worry. The most important thing is that researchers are aware of the potential for mislabeling of reagents, including cell lines, and that they get into good habits of understanding the limitation of their tools. One of the limitations of cell lines is that there's a risk of contamination, and therefore we need to establish good practice to extend findings across multiple different types of model.
Is it as an analogy, is it a bit like saying when there was that horse meat scandal where lasagnas that were meant to have beef in were found to have a horse meat in, but it's like saying we found 30,000 lasagnas with horse meat in around the world in the last 40 years.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, there's probably been enough lasagnas made with beef that those horse meat ones, they're not good, but it certainly isn't a reason to look sideways at any lasagna you see.
It's nothing to be terrified of. Good lab practice is that if it's really crucial that a finding is in a very specific cell type, you authenticate that cell line. There are services you can send off cell lines to, and they will authenticate that they are the cells that you say that they are, that they've got the number of chromosomes that they're supposed to have, that they're behaving as they should do. But most of the time, we're using cell lines as an initial model for verification. To then move on to more reliable models. So I don't think it's such a catastrophic problem. And also, a good cell biologist will hopefully notice some types of contamination. For example, I was using a cell line in my own work that I'm convinced was contaminated based on the morphology of the cells I was using. And I'd been trained throughout my lab time to take time getting to know the cells I was using and to look out for any signs of heterogeneity that might suggest contamination. It didn't actually matter in my case because I wasn't going to publish the data from these cells, but you can sometimes you can just see it. Obviously, sometimes you can't, so you do need to authenticate cells, but sometimes it's really obvious.
Which is a bit like saying if you want to, you're making your lasagna, but you're really just trying to check whether the cheese will brown the right way, so it doesn't really matter what the meat is.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
I like how this has become a lasagna-based metaphor.
I know, I'm going to see how far I can take this.
Basically, there are lots of different things that a cell biologist will take into account when using cell lines, including not to rely on data that is only from one particular cell line because of this very issue. Without meaning to sound all ivory tower, I think this is the kind of finding that the general public just doesn't benefit from knowing. It's useful detail for bench scientists, but otherwise, forget everything I said.
So a few weeks ago, we got an email in from Alex, who wrote, the idea of a link between artificial colour and hyperactivity in children is one that is often ridiculed by skeptics. A quick search on Google Scholar shows that there is no real link between the two. Still, I'm having a hard time coming round to it. My parents and our family doctor believed that my sister was affected by this, and my sister's allergy decided what sort of foods we kept in the house. I remember a number of hyperactive episodes my sister had that my parents could link to some kind of foodstuff with an artificial colour. My sister still avoids food with artificial colour to this day. So... what evidence is there, I thought, to support the link between hyperactivity and artificial colours, particularly in children, and why might Alex's family notice that her sister's hyperactivity correlates with consuming them? So first off, I wanted to take a look at what the literature actually says. So this idea of a relationship between artificial food dye and hyperactivity in children was first suggested by Dr. Ben Feingold in his paper Hyperkinesis and Learning Disabilities Linked to Ingestion of Artificial Food Colours and Flavours.
Are you just working alphabetically through doctors?
Through doctors called Ben.
Dr. Benz.
Ben.
Yeah,
exactly,
Dr. Benz. I've got a massive problem with Dr. Benz.
And once you're done with Dr. Benz, you'll move on to Uncle Benz. That's not rice. You call that rice, it's shit.
This was published in the American Journal of Nursing in 1977. I might even have talked about Ben Feingold and his work on the show in the past, but if we did, it was a long time ago and I was probably wrong. But Feingold...
Whoa, what would you have said about him?
I don't know, just his name was familiar when it came up. I thought, maybe I've talked about this thing, but I don't know. Feingold's paper concluded, artificial food colours and flavours have the capacity to induce adverse reactions affecting every system of the body.
Blue Smarties.
We'll come to Blue Smarties. And he went on to advocate an elimination diet to control the, quote, behavioural disturbance.
An elimination diet is where you vote for who gets to eat.
There's a public vote for who gets to eat.
It is, yeah.
This became something of a fad in the late 70s and early 80s, with the Feingold diet being popular amongst parents, and books like Morris Hanson's E for Additive sitting on many responsible parents' bookshelves.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. However, research published in 1983 undermined Feingold's elimination diet. Cavale et al. Published a meta-analysis on the Feingold hypothesis, which found, quote, extant research has not validated the Feingold hypothesis. Diet modification should be questioned as an efficacious treatment for hyperactivity.
Okay.
But despite this, the idea of a link between food colouring and hyperactivity, by now referred to as attention deficit disorder or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, this belief by now had already persisted in consumers. The meme had spread into the general population. And so throughout the 90s and early 2000s, at least in the UK, I can't speak for any other country. I mean, I often try, but I fuck that up. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, we saw a gradual elimination of many artificial food dyes from popular products, seeking to capitalise on being able to claim no artificial colour on the packaging. Because they thought that would drive sales. And presumably it did, because otherwise they wouldn't have done it. They'd have seen, we take that off and the sales go up. One of the more notable examples of this was, to my mind, Blue Smarties, as you say, Alice. Now, Smarties, it turns out, are a different thing in the United States. So for the benefit of American listeners, Smarties are... similar to chocolate M&Ms. They're like chocolate-covered, pill-shaped things covered in a chocolate chocolate
hate
shell.
Chocolate M&Ms.
Not like M&Ms?
I don't like the chocolate in chocolate M&Ms.
Oh, the chocolate M&Ms is better.
It's not sweet enough.
Oh, that's why it's best.
Yeah,
I quite like them because they're like Smarties.
I don't like the peanut ones.
No,
they're rubbish, and no one likes the crunchy ones.
Oh, Lana loves the crunchy ones.
Really? No.
And Katie loves the peanut ones.
No, well, people like the peanut ones. I don't like the peanut ones.
I need to stop making generalizations about what exists and doesn't exist in America based on what my wife tells me.
Yeah.
Because on more than one occasion, it's turned out that either one, it's just a Texas thing and Texas doesn't have it, or two, it's just a Katie thing,
or three, she just flat out lied.
Or she's just spinning me a line.
Funny.
So note to self: your wife is not representative of the entire population of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, Katie told him that Donald Trump's president. Actually, what day is it? This going out Thursday? That might not be true.
Not be the case.
Might not be true.
Might not be the case anymore.
Point.
Yeah.
One of the weird things that I saw someone saying at QED.
When you're not doing a story, you interrupt with little anecdotes.
I'm going to bring a little bit of myself to it.
Go on.
Someone's pointing out that at QED, a lot of people just took as granted that Brexit and Trump were bad things. And the person was kind of saying that, well, I agree with that, but we as critical thinkers shouldn't axiomatically just accept that that's true. Now, that was a very weird position to be in. I mean, especially if you look at like Brexit, 99% or 90% of economic experts say this is economic suicide. It's percentage-wise, the ratio of those who think it's experts who are steeped in the evidence, who think it's a bad idea to a good idea, is very, very similar to those who think climate change is happening to those who think it isn't happening. And we wouldn't say, well, we shouldn't talk about climate change being a genuine thing, axiomatically, even though we all would agree that it is. We shouldn't axiomatically think that it is because people disagree. And it's similar with Donald Trump. It's very hard to imagine there is anybody who's got any handle on any credible evidence that could still say Donald Trump is a good president, is doing good things, or is competent at his job. In that we're 9 months into his presidency, more than 9 months into presidency, he hasn't achieved anything. He hasn't passed any legislation. The stuff he's tried to pass has been blocked universally by the Supreme Court, and he's openly courted war with...
Sure. I think my issue with that statement that, we shouldn't axiomatically accept that is that we're not axiomatically accepting that. I agree we should be sceptical of the claim Brexit is going to be a bad thing, and we should make sure that there is evidence to support that claim. The same with Donald Trump. But to assume that it is axiomatic and that no one has actually looked at, or hang on, look, all these economists who think it's going to be a terrible idea, for example.
To assume that nobody's looked at the evidence and said, oh, hang on, is Donald Trump openly starting Twitter wars with the widows of deceased servicemen whom he didn't bother calling when they died? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yeah.
So in 2006... Nestle announced that they were phasing out artificial colours in Smarties.
Okay.
Citing concerns about children's health.
Well, they really care about children's health.
They do really.
They really care about
children's health at Nestle.
That's maybe something we should look at. I've only peripherally looked at the evidence of what I know the
Nestle South Africa thing.
I'm aware that they've aggressively pushed baby formula
is the thing, isn't
knowing full well that they don't have access to clean water, and have disparaged your ability to produce adequate breast milk if you are undernourished yourself in order to drive women towards using formula, knowing full well they don't have clean water.
Be worth looking to see if there's good data on that thing, or if that's just something that lefties pass around to get grumpy at Nestle.
Yeah,
I remember when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to have Rowntree's stuff because they supported apartheid.
Did they?
I don't know if that's true or not. That's just what I was told as I was a kid. It's not something I've ever questioned. Shitty skeptic, Mike. I'm a shitty skeptic.
Who made minstrels? They've got to have supported apartheid.
No, the people who made Vice Versas did. Though.
Vice Versas, damn it! Damn it! Oh, that's annoying. I knew where I was going with that. I just couldn't.
According to the Daily Mail at the time,
why was it that Vice Versas were the black and white ones, whereas minstrels weren't one colour on the inside and a different colour on the outside?
Maybe it would have been a bit on the nose.
Well, normally typically just below the nose, like around the mouth.
So according to the Daily Mail at the time, the reason that Nestle decided to phase out artificial colours in Smarties was because of a study that actually came out of the University of Liverpool on the synergistic effects of food dyes, which when I looked up this paper turned out to be an in vitro study on mouse cell lines.
Oh, good.
They get super hyperactive. I've seen it.
Yeah, they're just scooting about the bottom of that petri dish like stink.
Yeah.
Oh God, are these hyperactive ob mice?
Ob mice.
Just like obscenely round, rotund mice, just going mental.
We had ob mice at QED.
At QED, they appeared on a slide. They did.
We did.
But whatever the real reason, it might have been that study, it might have been, some other reason. Whatever the reason, Nestle decided to phase out artificial colours. This meant that they had to discontinue the blue-coloured Smartie, which had replaced the coffee-flavoured light brown Smartie in 1987.
What?
Oh, wow.
Because turns out Smarties used to be flavoured.
I remember blue Smarties being introduced.
Yeah.
I didn't know they replaced a coffee one.
That
sounds amazing. My God, what? I've been robbed 4 years old. I probably wasn't allowed coffee at that point. So 30 years I've been denied coffee-flavoured
Smarties. It turns out that dark brown Smarties used to be dark chocolate.
Yeah.
Light brown Smarties used to be coffee flavoured.
Okay.
And orange Smarties still are.
They still are orange flavoured.
Yeah, I've always wondered why the fuck the orange ones taste of orange.
But they're the
For
only...
a while, I thought that was just psychosomatic. Like I was imagining it.
There is a rumour that it is psychosomatic, but it's not. It's legitimate.
What colour were the red ones? What flavour were the red ones?
The rest of them were milk chocolate.
So they weren't even all flavoured.
So
this is staggeringly inconsistent.
Used to be
the green ones used to be broccoli flavoured.
But they're now all milk chocolate, and the orange one used to actually be orange chocolate. They used to put orange oil in the chocolate and make it orange chocolate.
Did they?
But now it's actually just a flavoured shell.
Why am I only finding out about all this?
Why do I know all this shit about Smarties?
Why do you know all this? You didn't do this. That's not research you've done for this question.
No, this is stuff I already knew.
That's extant knowledge.
Yeah. By the time the light brown Smartie gets discontinued, it may or may not have still been a coffee one, but it was originally a coffee-flavoured Smartie, the light brown Smartie.
I remember the introduction of the blue one, and then the lack of the blue one, and then the reintroduction of the blue one. What?
Well, Nestle were unable to find a natural blue dye, so they discontinued the blue Smartie until they could find a natural blue dye, which eventually they did 2 years later in 2008 when they brought back the blue Smartie, looking somewhat anemic compared to its vibrant forebear.
Smarties go anemic if you leave them out for a bit. They go like a kind of
lose the colour.
Yeah,
just bleach if you leave them in the sun.
They slowly bleach, but they go like a bit sort of like pastel shade.
Yeah, I mean they are. If you look at Smarties from 10 years ago versus, well, it'll be like 15 years ago now versus Smarties today, and there's a picture on Wikipedia of them next to each other. You can see how pale Smarties are.
Is that why
now.
they don't rub off in your fingers as much anymore? Because they used to leave your fingers multicoloured.
Quite possibly,
They don't anymore?
Yeah, the blue Smarties used to leave kids' tongues blue as well. That was one of the reasons they were popular. But there we go.
Bloody hell. Listeners, well, I'm glad that we were able to shoehorn in an extended segment about British chocolates again.
Giving out free Smarties next QED.
Oh,
I can only assume.
Tell you something, that'll be a fuck of a lot cheaper. One each. We can throw them a lot easier as well. Anyone in the audience can catch it.
So the strongest evidence in support of the hypothesis that food colouring is linked to hyperactivity came in a 2007 study published in The Lancet. This study was titled Food Additives and Hyperactive Behaviour in 3-year-old and 8/9-year-old Children in the Community, a randomised, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. This study took almost 300 children, about half of them 3-year-olds and the rest are 8 to 9-year-olds, and they gave them one of 3 drinks. The first drink contained 4 different food dyes. That was sunset yellow, carmoisine.
Is sunset yellow the one that turns children yellow if they drink too much
like
Sunny
Sunny
Delight?
D.
Quite possibly. You might be thinking of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
No, Sunny Delight genuinely... it was in the news. I don't know if that meant it was true.
We tried to visit a chocolate factory.
Yeah?
One run by monks.
Yeah, we
a
did.
monkey chocolate factory.
We did.
Yeah. By monkey, I mean monk-like.
We saw lots of monks.
We saw
exactly 8 monks.
We saw exactly 8 monks.
Did they do the hair thing?
No, but they did sing. They sang Genesis. Not like as in Phil Collins, but as in the Bible.
Oh,
thing.
I thought you meant Phil Collins.
No. But also they all got to there and went on little harmonica then. Oh, as it was in the beginning, is now and ever shall be, world without end, amen.
And there was one at the back dressed as a gorilla playing the drums. It's monks, it's Genesis, it's chocolate.
Oh, it's all coming together.
It all comes
Lovely.
together into
Lovely work.
one niche joke. So the study took 300 children. They gave them one of three drinks. The first drink contained sunset yellow. It contained carmoazine. It contained tartrazine, and it contained food red number 7.
I can't really pay attention because from what you just said, I was just thinking of telling a joke about Sean Connery's sister's daughter, but it's a little niche.
It's a little niche. That's true. And they also added sodium benzoate as a preservative. So the first drink had sunset yellow, carmoazine, tartrazine, and food red number 7, which is called something else in the paper that I couldn't pronounce, so I looked up synonyms for it, and it's also called food red 7, which is nice and easy to say. And sodium benzoate was used as a preservative. They had a second drink. That drink also used sunset yellow. It also used carmoazine, and it used quinoline yellow and Allura red AC plus sodium benzoate.
Okay.
Now you might be asking why they put 4 dyes into each drink and why 2 of the dyes are repeated across groups.
Is it to make the whole thing brown like Play-Doh? Mix all the colours together. The second you mix 2 Play-Doh colours together, you get brown.
You just get brown. Just go straight to brown. Same with plasticine.
Yeah.
From 0 to brown in one mixing.
Fastest stink.
According to the paper, the first drink reproduced the mix of colours which was used in previous research by the same authors, which this research was following up on. So that's why they used one formulation. The second drink contains the dyes that the authors claim represents a typical mix that a child might consume.
Okay.
So that's why they've done 2 separate mixes and why they've crossed some dyes are in both mixes. There was a third drink, of course, which was control and contained no artificial dye. The 3 drinks were then tested on blinded adult volunteers who were unable to tell the difference between them by taste to control
to prove that they all tasted the same.
They all tasted the same.
Except children have a totally different taste.
Have a different palate, that's true. I mean, it says adult volunteers, but it says they were 20 years old, which means students made, didn't it? You got students to do it. You got students to drink this. And given the inclusion criteria mentions that a number of children were excluded from the study because of an allergy to blackcurrants, I suspect they were using Ribena or something similar as the base for the 3 drinks.
Okay,
which meant that the dyes wouldn't really affect the colour that much because Ribena is a very dark purple anyway.
Yes.
So they had attempted to disguise the colour in blackcurrant juice, and they taste tested to see that the 3 drinks tasted the same.
Is Ribena a natural colour? Because that would have been a confounding factor.
It would have been a major confounder. But I believe that Ribena doesn't use artificial dyes. The outcome measure used was a global hyperactivity aggregate, which is a numeric score generated from the reports of the child's behaviour gathered by teachers, parents, and classroom observers. For older kids, they also did a computer-based attention test.
Okay.
So they took the observations from teachers, observations from parents, and classroom observers, and the computer test, and brought all that together into a single score, which they called the Global Hyperactivity Aggregate. And the results showed a statistically significant increase in GHA scores for the 3-year-olds getting drink A compared to control, but no effect for the 3-year-olds getting drink B.
Okay.
The authors also noted that they did a subgroup analysis where they only look at kids who had drank at least 85% of the drink they were given. And in that subgroup, the statistically significant effect held. So drink A had an effect, but drink B didn't.
Okay.
For the 8 to 9-year-olds, a statistically significant increase in GHA scores was seen by children drinking both drink A and drink B compared to controls, but only when you look at the 85% subgroup.
So you haven't got to have enough of it.
When you analyse...
8 to 9-year-olds typically bigger.
And with 8 to 9-year-olds being typically bigger, they increased the dose of the food dye in the drink.
Oh, okay. So they did account for that already.
To account for the fact that they're physically larger. But that's only in the 85% subgroup. So when you look at the entire data set, the effect for drink A disappeared, but not for drink B.
So A in the 3-year-olds.
And B in the 8-year-olds.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
so
funny.
just to summarise
A and
that.
B in the 8-year-olds.
A and B in the 8-year-olds over 85%.
Oh, sorry,
in the
sorry.
85%
B in all the
subgroup.
8-year-olds.
So just to summarise, for 3-year-olds, there was an effect for drink A, but not drink B. For 8-year-olds, there was an effect for drink B, but not drink A, unless the 8-year-olds drank most of the drink, in which case there was an effect for both drinks A and B.
Okay.
On the basis of these data, the authors concluded artificial colours or a sodium benzoate preservative or both in the diet results in an increased hyperactivity in 3-year-olds and 8 to 9-year-old children in the general population.
Okay.
So that was the conclusion of that study. This study led to what has become known as the Southampton Six, which is not, as you might surmise, a falsely accused 1970s terrorist cell. The Southampton Six consists of the 6 food dyes used in this study: sunset yellow, camorazine, tartrazine, food red 7, quinoline yellow, and allura red AC. The Southampton Six attracted the attention of the European Food Safety Authority, who then performed their own analysis of the data from this paper. And this analysis was published in the Food Safety Authority Journal in 2008. I don't know how the Food Safety Authority managed to publish in the Food Safety Authority Journal. I think they probably had an in.
Bit of nepotism.
But from that paper, they say, the panel considered that the steps taken for score normalization and aggregation are mathematical transformations which might affect the assumptions of normality and independence of the data, which are essential for the whole statistical analysis. Therefore, the author's primary analysis was repeated using a more justifiable and conventional statistical model.
So it's saying they fucked the stats?
So the European Food Safety Authority didn't believe the statistical analysis in the original paper.
Okay.
So they did their own analysis on the same data.
Okay.
Reanalyzed the same data. So the reanalysis found no effect for drink A in 3-year-olds, where previously there was an effect.
Gotcha.
Except in the 85% subgroup.
Okay.
So now there was an effect in the 85% subgroup only for drink A in 3-year-olds. And they found no effect for drink A in the 8 to 9-year-olds at all, including the 85% subgroup. This leaves significant findings only for drink A in the 85% subgroup of 3-year-olds and drink B for all 8-year-olds.
Okay.
So the Food Safety Authority also did a version of their analysis where they excluded parental observations from the global aggregate score. And retained only the teacher observations and the computerized attention tests. In this analysis, they found no effect for anything except drink B in the 85% subgroup, which indicates that most of the significant effects that have been seen were driven by the parental reports.
Yeah, so self-reporting type thing, yeah.
So overall, the data here is really inconsistent.
Yeah.
Some dyes affect you when you're 3, others affect you when you're 8, but only if you ask your parents or if you've had a lot to drink. Even then, the changes in the GHA scores, though they're statistically significant, are relatively small and probably not clinically significant.
Yeah.
There's no reason to think that this would actually affect the child's schoolwork. Would it cause social or functional impairment? None of these is actually clear from these data. On top of that, the Food Safety Authority cited a lack of data on dose response. The fact that the dyes are mixed means that we can't isolate which dye is causing the effect.
It did seem weird that they would do that mix rather than just do one at a time.
Yeah. Or even if it is the preservatives, it could be the preservative causing the effect.
Thimerosal.
And it is also the case that there is no biologically plausible mechanism for any of this to happen. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, as a result of this research, the EU have introduced a precautionary warning label on any food containing one of the Southampton Six, which says, quote, may have an adverse effect on activity and attention in children. And if you go to a sweet shop now and look at the side of a packet of stuff, there's a good chance it'll actually have this warning on it. Over in the United States, this research prompted the FDA to conduct their own literature review, which concluded that there was not enough data to establish a link. So the FDA looked at the same literature and said, no, we're not convinced. But from my understanding, in the American system, you have to demonstrate active harm. In the European system, you have to demonstrate a lack of harm.
Yeah.
So in the EU's got a higher bar, effectively.
It's bad unless you can prove otherwise.
Yeah. Of course, this isn't the only data that looks at food dyes in the literature. Notably, there was a 2012 meta-analysis which stated that eliminating food dyes might benefit children with ADHD, but it also warns that these results could have been skewed by publication bias, that being the tendency to publish positive studies but not negative ones, which means that your systematic reviews and meta-analyses are working from a biased data set. And Steve Novella wrote about this topic for Neurologica in 2014, where he says, an effect from food dyes is possible, but its overall effect on ADHD is minor and only one piece to a larger puzzle. Unfortunately, this leaves us without a clear recommendation for consumers. I hope to see further rigorous trials to more definitively put this question to rest. And while I am reluctant to further compound the confusion here, it should be pointed out that the 2012 meta-analysis looks specifically at the effect on the behaviour of children with diagnosed attention deficit disorder, whereas the 2007 paper is with the 3 different drinks, that's just looking at children in the general population. So there is that distinction to be made as well. It could be the case that food dyes exacerbate hyperactivity but don't cause hyperactivity.
Yeah.
But again, that is supposition, and just plain out the data is just not good enough in this field. All of which is to say, the literature is not conclusive. And so skeptics ridiculing this idea, which would have included me before I decided to look into this, skeptics ridiculing this idea should know better. We should only ridicule the ridiculous. And an association between food dye and hyperactivity is not ridiculous. It's unlikely, perhaps, given the lack of a plausible mechanism, no dose response, and the inconsistent data, but it's not in ridicule territory.
Yeah.
So that's the literature. That's the state of the literature, which is to say, a fucking shambles. But to return to the second part of Alex's question, she says, I remember a number of hyperactive episodes my sister had that my parents could link to some foodstuff with artificial colour. Let's assume that there is no link between food dye and hyperactivity, and that may well be the case. From the inconsistent, messy data, it could go either way. Let's assume there is no link. If that is the case, why would Alex remember her sister having hyperactive episodes which could be linked back to food dye? One fairly parsimonious explanation for this would be confirmation bias. So when your parents notice your sister's behaviour, they do so with a pre-existing assumption that food dyes are to blame. Yeah. So they look back through her recent activity for something which could be blamed and go, oh yeah, she had that diet Fanta, or she ate that bag of M&Ms or whatever. And that is then taken as confirmation of the association.
Yeah, or it's sweets and Coke at a kid's party, and then suddenly your kid's all herring around. Well, yeah, they've been in a room with like 20 kids herring around all afternoon.
Or they've come back from a busy day herring around with kids, and now they're really tired, and children get hyperactive when they're tired.
Indeed, yeah. But every time your sister ate M&Ms or drank a Diet Fanta and did not subsequently act up, that just goes unnoticed.
Yeah.
So you remember the hits, but it's not even that you forget the misses. You just don't even notice.
You don't spot the misses.
Don't even notice the misses. And then this paints an unreliable picture of what is happening because we're only working from half the data. And we know that this happens because there is data on this, because of another thing which is supposed to cause hyperactivity in children, which is sugar. Now, I'm not going to go into very much detail on this because I've been talking for far too long already, but a 1995 meta-analysis found that there is no relationship between sugar intake and behaviour in children. Just straight up, there is no link. But one paper in particular I thought was fascinating. The effects of sugar ingestion expectancies on mother-child interactions. This was published in the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology in 1994.
That's abnormal psychology, not the psychology of normal kids.
Who knows? Could be either. Could be either.
Yeah.
Could be either.
It could be psychology done by abnormal psychologists.
35 children, so very small numbers, but 35 children whose parents believed that their child was behaviourally sensitive to sugar were randomised into 2 groups. In the first group, the parents were told that their child had been given a sugary drink. In the second group, the parents had been told that their child had been given a drink sweetened with aspartame. In fact, all children received aspartame. But nevertheless, the parents who believed their child had been given sugar reported that their child was hyperactive.
Which is ironic because these days...
probably the other way around these days.
Yeah.
Now, we could say that the effects of the expectancies of the parents had a placebo effect on the behaviour of the child, which resulted in a real physical change in the child's behaviour, as if the child had consumed sugar. Or we could say that this is biased reporting from parents actively seeking confirming behaviour in their child because that's what they're expecting to see. So Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub is tonight in Dr. Duncan's on St John's Lane. That's our social event. So if you're in the Liverpool area, you should come along to that. That starts at 8 o'clock. We will also, before that, we'll be having the Merseyside Skeptics board meeting. So if you want to come along and listen to the shit that we jabber about, you're more than welcome to come along to that as well.
Truth.
Marsh, I think we've just published the new episode of Be Reasonable as well.
We have. This is with Don Donderi, who is a UFO researcher and a very nice chap.
Sounds like an Italian gangster.
It's an incredible name. It is an incredible name. But he was a very, very lovely fella. And it's a slight change of pace. So I've been through a few different UFO researchers in the last couple of episodes with a few breaks in between. But I thought he was a very interesting fella. I hope the listeners will like it. I think he's probably not as skeptical as one of my previous guests, way more skeptical than another of my previous guests on the subject of UFOs. But I think he's kind of along the right lines, but just had his evidence bar at a very different setting to where mine is. But I think it was an interesting chat.
And Alice, I think you're doing a talk, is that right?
I'm doing another talk in Glasgow for Glasgow Skeptics on November the 13th at Waterstone's Sochi Hall Street.
Sochi
Hall Street.
No, let's go with Sochi Hall Street. You call it Sochi Hall Street when you get there.
Yeah, well
done. That's what you call it in Derby.
Yeah. At 7:00. So people in that region should come and see it. It's my Cancer Cures talk, so it goes down quite well.
Cancer Cures talk?
Cancer Cures talk.
Oh, okay.
It's a talk on cancer cures.
Right, rather than you were saying cancer is a cure for talking.
I mean, eventually,
depending on the type of cancer.
That's true. It could happen quite quickly, yeah.
Aside from that, then, I think that is all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains is for me to thank Marsh for coming along today.
Cheers.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We've been Skeptics with a K, and we will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.